Hello lovelies. Today we're going to try and take a look at the newest Marvel Superheroes RPG, of which there seem to have been a profusion over the years. This is the latest one. This is the Marvel Multiverse RPG, and some people I know are extremely keen on it, and having read it I found it interesting enough that I've pre-ordered couple of the supplements, so I guess we'll see how it all turns out at the end. It's a fairly nice hardbound book, no ribbon that I could see, but maybe that's not appropriate to superhero RPGs. It caps out at about 320 pages, but it doesn't feel that heavy or look that heavy despite the quality of the paper that they have elected to use. So interesting from a production point of view. Probably not that interesting to anyone out there, but interesting enough to me. It feels more like 200 pages to me, but it's actually over 300, so that's fascinating, at least to me. So a lot of that 300 pages, which some people might find somewhat intimidating, especially if you want to introduce kids to RPGs. A lot of that 300 pages is powers, character stat blocks, and so on. So the game itself isn't actually that big or intimidating, because the rules themselves only cover about 40 pages, and that's including introductions and stuff. Character creation is only about 10 pages. Backstories, which are important to a character, are about 10 pages. The powers are spread over about 15 pages. And then there's about 130 pages of Marvel character readouts. And the rest is advice, which most of us can skip over, but which is very useful to any new gamers coming along out there. It's written clearly. Perhaps it has been aimed at a younger potential audience. If so, that's good. Weirdly, this is going to sound really negative, but weirdly, none of the art seems particularly shit. In fact, a lot of it seems to hark back to the sort of Ultimates, Grant Morrison, X-Men sort of era, rather than the newer, more CalArts type stuff. A lot of the art in newer Marvel has not been particularly great, shall we say, due, I think, in large part to the money gradually draining out of the whole comics business. But here they've been able to kind of cherry pick the better pieces or commission pieces from people who are actually good at what they do. And I dare say RPGs are more profitable than comics these days. So it's interesting in that way. And I suppose having the RPG potentially gives you the outlet to write your own superhero stories in comics that have left a lot of people cold these days. The system itself is mostly pretty simple. You roll 3d6 and you add them up. So 5, 6, 7. I can't remember what that number is right now because I grabbed the nearest novelty dice. But whatever, you add them together. Add or subtract modifiers, and then you're trying to get over a target number that typically ranges between 11, which is the average roll on 3d6, and 16 at the sort of upper end. That can be modified by between -6 to +6 for circumstances, and then you will add various other things to get your result. Alright, here comes some maths. The average result on 3d6 is 11 for anyone keeping score, but there's a few wrinkles in that. A roll of a 1 on the middle dice, the special dice, counts as a 6 and is called a marvelous success. so that brings up the actual average roll to 11.3. Now that sounds like a very small change, but it does increase your chances of success on a difficulty 11 task from 50% to just over 61%. So that gives you some idea of how even small changes can affect overall chances, a fair amount. A marvelous success gives you some sort of bonus in whatever you're rolling for. Double damage in combat, for example. A marvelous failure means something good or advantageous still happens for you, even though you fail at the roll. So you're rolling 616 to get the best, and if you get that, then you succeed despite any other factors. Well done. Of course, you have less than a 1 in 200 chance of doing that, to give you some perspective, at least under normal circumstances, but still. Now, what is fairly accessible, easy, normal, rolling, and addition is complicated by the fact that you can get edges and troubles, and you can get multiple of them, though each one cancels out the other on a 1-for-1 basis. Edges allow you to re-roll a dice, so 2 isn't very good. I will re-roll that one, and that's 6, I think. So that's much better. So that's how that goes. But that's not necessarily particularly intuitive for you. Now, as I said, they cancel each other out, but you can get multiples. So if you have multiple positive rerolls, you can keep rerolling till you run out. If you have multiple troubles, the GM can force you to keep rolling until he runs out. Now, we're all familiar by now with the advantage rule from Dungeons & Dragons that lets you roll a d20, well, 2d20, and keep the highest. In numerical terms, in D&D, that's equivalent to a bonus of plus 3.3 to the roll, or plus 3 to plus 4, which is how most people interpret the equivalent. So, while this is a very simple, accessible rule that everyone kind of grasps and understands through D&D, it rapidly becomes unintuitive once rerolls, and particularly multiple rerolls, start coming into play. So that's kind of a slight knock against the game, I suppose. It's a lot of maths talk for a game about superheroes, aimed at tweens and teens, I think. But if there is a single serious flaw in this freewheeling and otherwise fairly simple game, it is that you can't easily grok the feel of probabilities on the fly. Clearly amongst the designers, some familiarity with the old Phase Rip game was involved. The stats cover similar ground. There's Karma, which will be familiar, health. Instead of fighting agility, strength, endurance, reason, intuition, and psyche, there's melee, agility, resilience, vigilance, ego, and logic, which roughly correlates fighting to melee, agility to agility, strength is absent, endurance is resilience, reason is logic, intuition is vigilance, psyche is ego, roughly. So the practical upshot to all of this is that it is absolutely a piece of piss to convert old Phase Rip characters to the new game on a sort of 1-for-1 basis, almost. You apply superpowers like Might to reach beyond the range of the stat limits, which run -3 to 9, which correlates exactly with the range in the old yellow box TSR Basic Marvel. So Shift 0 would be -3, and then you count up from there. Losing the strength stat isn't quite as bad as you might think, as it helps even out the difference between different characters with different foci. So you can make attacks using a variety of stats, and there's no single god stat so far as combat is concerned, even though the Hulk is still going to paste you, so don't get ideas above your station. Each ability determines your base roll, 3d6 plus or minus the modifier, and your defenses, which will be again kind of familiar to D&D type people, which is 10 plus the ability score. So all very familiar to D&D players while still being different enough to be differentiated. Health is hit points, focus is a sort of mental hit points really. Karma is a lot simpler than the old phase rip system. It's points which are spent for rerolls, effectively giving you an edge even when you don't otherwise have an edge, but you can only spend 1 karma on any task, unless you're long shot maybe, I'm not sure. All characters are rated by rank, which runs 1 to 6, rank 1 being a noob sort of street level character, and rank 6 being a being of pure ultimate cosmic power. Rank determines how much damage you do with your attacks as a multiplier to the result of your rolls. To do damage, you just pick out your Marvel die and multiply its result by your rank, and then add the appropriate ability modifier. So a rank 2 hero rolling a 4 on the Marvel die and with a +2 melee ability would do 4 times 2, that's 8, +2, that's 10. Health is equal to your resilience score times 30, but has a minimum of 10, even for goons and weaklings. If our guy above also had +2 resilience, then he would have 60 hit points. So that would be quite a lot of punches of that caliber to take him out. Besides stats, characters also have backgrounds, origins, and occupations that give them traits and tags. Traits can be bad, and in that case they tend to help you collect karma points by playing into your flaws. Good ones, good traits, usually have some sort of mechanical advantage, though some are a mixed bag, and this is most often, I think, an edge under certain circumstances, so a free reroll. Tags, on the other hand, are more role-playing oriented, though I think they're probably going to end up being most useful for determining if you can make an ability roll to do something. So if you had a tag like, I don't know, contacts in a certain industry or whatever, then you could justify making a roll to get information from contacts in that industry, whereas another character who doesn't have that background, doesn't have that tag, might not be able to. So this may be the other area in which the game falls down a little, because it's not a very robust skill system even compared to the old phase rip system, and it makes it much harder to portray a specialist. Skilled characters who don't just have generalized hyper-competence in all things. You could probably fiddle away around that a bit using powers, because some of them sort of bleed between skill and power, but it's a bit clumsy. So, combat-wise, superhero comics and games used to be much more about punching things and doing spectacular feats, and much less about X-Prom. Fortunately, the game spends more time on the former than the latter. Maybe that's just part of the legacy of RPGs, I don't know. The rundown I've already given you covers much of that, but there's also plenty of scope for special moves, team moves, fastball specials, innovative attacks, and so on. Or even using your intelligence against a target that outmatches you in brute strength, for example. So you can utilize your character's particular strength to compete and fight with others, rather than necessarily always having to rely on strength and agility. When your health gets knocked down to 0, you're knocked out, and if your health gets knocked down to minus its positive level, then you die. So it's a bit hard to model maybe edgier superhero genres like Wildstorm, The Authority, The Boys, Martial Law, etc. But not impossible. It is a little bit sobering to see that Spider-Man is going to be straight up ganking goons over 50% of the time if he doesn't pull his punches. So that can be kind of a reality check, I guess. If you wanted to go a bit more like The Authority or The Boys, then you certainly could. It wouldn't take much. You could maybe introduce semi-permanent wounds for being crumped past 0 health, of course, with negative penalties to abilities resulting unless and until you get fixed. Or you could even allow targeted attacks to maim someone, I suppose, if you wanted to replicate Generation V or something. So that, there are ways around it, but it's not here in the game itself, as is. So there's that to consider, I suppose, if you're a little bit edgier, as people love to tell me I am. Weapons are also a bit pointless. Past a certain point, you take whichever is the higher bonus from either your natural attacks or the bonus from the weapon. So while a low-level goon might get +1 damage from using a rifle, if your agility attack bonus is more than that, then there's not much point in you picking up a gun, except for the range. One wonders what rank the Punisher is, and if he'd be just as deadly with his pinky finger as with an assault rifle. Though the rifle, as I say, does at least give him range. So there's tactical considerations, but they're not big ones. You could, of course, ignore this restriction if you really wanted to, and just pile the weapon bonus on top of whatever else is going on. But sometimes that makes sense, and sometimes it doesn't. And maybe that's another slight weakness in the system. Experience isn't very well handled. It's barely there, but then that never stopped a traveller. Characters can advance in rank, but this is suggested as something more like a sort of key event system, rather than an experience points or karma system. When you do rank up, you get a whole bunch of new shit all at once. So it might be better to consider something like the Cypher system, where you need to advance several different stats before you rank up. So that's how I do it, I think. Maybe I would allow players to raise one thing once per session, and once you've raised all the things necessary that you would normally get from ranking up, that's when you go up a rank. So that would make something like 12 to 15 sessions to go up a rank, but you would get something every session, meaning it would take 72 to 90 sessions to go all the way from rank 1 to rank 6, if you even wanted to go that far. It's suggested that you set rank limits on the game. Of course, heroes in comics tend to stay largely static. It's just the events and trauma and backstory that gets bigger rather than their powers necessarily, so you could just stay at that lower level if you wanted, and it being a superhero game, it's not going to make too much of a difference. So powers then. Powers come in groups, but you can ignore these groups really and freely choose which powers you have. It's just they're kind of suggested groups that all make sense. Powers come in ranks, and you start with 4 ranks to spend on powers. The powers are also limited by your overall rank and by other prerequisites. So you can't just start off with a base character with rank 4 mighty super strength unless your character is starting out at rank 4. Some of this feels like a little bit of a jip, but you do need balance of a sort in these sorts of games, and it does keep it all in a fairly even keel, especially for low-level characters. We get a bunch of heroes and villains that you can play yourself, but the conceit of a multiverse, hence the title of the game, is that each game is its own universe. So that opens things up. I don't particularly like playing around in existing universes with existing characters, but that's always going to be the appeal of an IP of something like Marvel, that you can step in and you can play your favourite heroes or exist in the same world as your favourite heroes, and so on. The end of the book is advice. It's fairly generic, but it's fairly good quality for a starter RPG. Of course, if you're watching this channel, then odds are, you don't really need that advice, because you've read it before in plenty of other games. There's nothing hugely unique or even particularly aimed at superhero RPGs necessarily, but yeah, it's good enough. So style-wise, I think the layout is nice and clean. The language is readable. The artwork, they've chosen non-shit artwork, so that's good. So I can't really fault it on style necessarily. So I think I would actually go so far as to give it a 5 on style. In terms of substance, I'm only going to give it a 3. Now, that's not due to any particular flaw with the game per se. It's a problem with the genre. A superhero role-playing game is by nature and necessity a universal RPG, and as such, like all other universal RPGs, it doesn't do any single thing particularly hugely well. I also felt like we needed more powers or better power creation guidelines than we got here. Maybe at some point we'll get a supplement, something like the old Ultimate Powers book. But it seems like they're putting out additional powers in dribs and drabs. So there's an X-Men source book which will have some new stuff in it. There is a Spider-Verse book coming out after that which will have spider-related powers in it. I guess we'll see. I also think we need more options for super skilled rather than superhuman beings, more traits and so on. But these will also doubtless come via supplementary material. If I was to compare this with anything, I would compare it to the G.I. Joe or Transformers RPGs, where the main core book has enough, but doesn't feel quite complete. Another criticism of the substance of the game would be that it doesn't cope with mismatched power levels particularly well, which is something the more story-focused Margaret Weis Marvel RPG, or is it Vice, did manage to do very well. So it's a mixed bag. I've got some friends who are super into this and think it's the new kid on the block that's going to be really effective and be a reach out product. Is it? I'm not sure. Is it taking the world by storm? Apparently it sells well outside the States. I don't know. I personally, my assessment would be that Marvel has peaked. Perhaps Deadpool will change that and breathe new life into the franchise, but you can't make every film Deadpool. Well, I guess you could, but it wouldn't work. So I'm not sure that Marvel is still the unstoppable cultural juggernaut that it was. If this had come out around Endgame, then I'd be more inclined to believe it. But as things stand, probably not. But I would say that this is probably the best superhero RPG, or at least the best Marvel superhero RPG since Phase Rip, and I think that is saying a lot. In fact, it's certainly more accessible and has a lower barrier to entry. And because it's relatively simple, it's relatively hackable. So yeah, that's all that considered. So final score then, I gave it 5 for style, 3 for substance. It's 8 out of 10, 4 out of 5. if you're into superhero role-playing, I think it's worth picking it up. Is it the new be-all and end-all? Probably not, but it is a very good and effective entry into a long lineage of superhero RPGs, particularly Marvel ones, which seem to get licensed out to someone new every other month. So I hope that this has some more longevity and has a chance to build up a sort of canonical series of books and cover the ground that is missing in the main RPG. Excelsior! I have a fairly mellow Discord if you want to join us there for a bit of conversation and debate. We have people from all over, really, and for the most part, it's fairly good-natured and peaceful. As long as you come in that kind of spirit, you'll be fine.
Word to your mom, came to drop off, got more round.